Welcome to the Make a Baby podcast. I'm Carolina Sotomayor, your podcast host and expert Reiki womb healer. Over the past 6 years, I've had the honor of helping over 75 babies come into the world through the power of Reiki. I believe that healing is not meant to be done alone, nor should it be. On this podcast, you'll hear amazing Reiki guided meditations, empowering healing tips, and taboo topics with a focus on inclusivity and representation. Are you ready for these conversations? I am. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Make a Baby podcast. I'm Carolina Sotomayor, your podcast host and Reiki womb healer. This week on today's episode, we are talking about something that, again, we must be inclusive here and we need to represent everyone on this podcast. But today we're bringing back a blast from the past, Jenny and Marianne Ortega. Ladies, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having us. Again.
Oh my God, I'm obsessed with you. Obsessed. Today we're going to talk about who gets pregnant as a lesbian couple. And I think that it's really important. I love everything about your story. You're some of my favorite clients I've ever had. Again, obsessed with you. And I love that you're so open about your journey and that you're willing to share it with the world. And I love that you have a blog. And I know when people listen to this episode, you're going to change lives. So thank you for representing. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing your story. And most of all, thank you for being you. And I'm so excited to see the magic that's going to unfold shortly on this episode. So let's dive in a little bit. So we're going to discuss a little bit later some changes that you have had in your fertility, but you have taught me so much as an ally, as a person that is 100% supportive of LGBTQ+, like roles in fertility and what those roles may be and how they might look different than maybe a heterosexual couple. So one of those things are the roles of a caring parent and a supportive parent and what those terms mean. And when I say caring, for anyone saying that's not caring, like, oh, let's be nice and supportive, it's caring, like you're carrying something in your arms. So CARRYING. And I think that's really important too, because sometimes if you speak too fast, it can sound like caring instead of carrying. So I want to dive in. So you as a couple, can you define what a caring parent is and what is the supportive parent?
Yeah. So I think for us, when our journey started, it was a lot of, we had some back and forth in the beginning, I guess, of trying to figure out who would carry first. And we kind of landed on Jenny going first because, in her words, she was older. So she decided that she was going to carry first. And really, all that means is that she would be the one whose body was going through the IUI treatments. In our case, she was going to be the one who would take any kind of medication needed for that process and eventually carry a baby for us. And then my role at that time was to be the supportive partner, the supportive parent, just aiding in whatever way that is to the parent who's going through the physical, either the pain of the medications, the side effects, the actual procedures themselves. And so it was a lot of making sure that you're there for them and helping them in whatever capacity that might be. So it's kind of like differentiating who would be the parent that carries and who would be the parent that supports the parent that carries.
Right.
Got it. And so I think some people are like, well, that's a very obvious question. I think that it's not necessarily an obvious decision or an obvious definition, besides the actual biological part of, like, when you were describing Jenny, she would be the one that was going through the procedure. The caring parent is the one who is trying to get pregnant in the physical sense.
Yeah.
Now, I think what is really important to, and what I've seen you through your journey, through both of you, is defining what those roles are. Like, what is the expectation of each of those roles? And I recently, because you inspired me so much, I use these terms actually with a lady I met at a friend's chiropractor office recently. And she's married to a man. And I said, well, there's this concept that, and I mentioned, I didn't mention your names, but I mentioned, I was like, there's a concept of a caring parent and a supportive parent. I was like, but there's not a parent that does it all. I
Right.
said, and if you're pregnant, I was like, and you're exhausted, and I was like, what is that other parent doing to alleviate this huge physical thing that you're growing this tiny human in your womb? And she's like, oh no, we just been operating as normal. And I do everything. And then he's, I think he works in oil or something. He's gone a lot.
I do think also like at creating those two roles as a queer couple, it does help make the not like the supporting parent feel included in the process of creating a child because we don't get to do it the quote unquote normal way. We have
Right.
to kind of create these roles to make us both feel included.
I love that. Okay, that's profound. Is there anything about the supportive parent that you wanted as a caring parent for them to do besides going to the appointments? Is there anything extra you've asked of that person?
I think that in terms of like when I'm the supportive parent, I make sure that I do my best to alleviate any kind of like extra stress. Like unfortunately, like, and this is kind of, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I do think that because I guess the thing is that we have switched roles recently, and I can look back now and look at the time that I spent as the supportive parent, and I can realize that Jenny, unfortunately, did a lot of things on her own for herself,
Oh,
and it
wow.
was not fair. Like now looking back, I think it does. Now that the roles have reversed, you kind of are able to see things a little bit clearer in hindsight. And I know that in hindsight, there were some times where Jenny was the one making the appointment, going to the appointment, and like the follicle checks where it's not necessarily the insemination is happening, and she was doing that alone because I was working or because I couldn't get off of work for that. I needed
Mm.
to make sure that I had time to be able to be there for the insemination itself, but that didn't necessarily mean that I was able to be there for every other appointment. And so in hindsight, I can realize now that I'm in the role of the
So you've
caring
switched roles, is what you're saying. You've switched. So
parent.
Jenny was a caring parent, and you're now the one trying to conceive.
Yeah, I didn't mean to jump the gun on that, but I
No, let's do
definitely
it.
I definitely think that in our switching roles, I have been able to see things more clearly that there were some times when Jenny was left or meant to do things by herself, and I can't imagine what that was like. And it's definitely been like a conversation that we've had to have and be really honest about, and definitely some apologizing on my end because I didn't fully understand the role until we switched.
And so
So
you've gone through it.
yeah,
So
so
why did you switch?
so the last time we inseminated was in last August. We ended up having a miscarriage. And so we
Sorry.
obviously had to have the grief of that. And for me, coming to terms with switching roles, I think felt right in the moment and still does feel exactly what we needed to do. In my journey, I think I'm thankful for it because I would have never found out I had endometriosis. And I feel like my journey was complete. And I feel like I was ready to not pass it on over, but I think Marianne being willing to try for us to create a family was something that was big and a huge conversation we had to have. But I felt like my journey was complete and we were ready to switch roles and which in itself, if we're being really honest, like the fact that we can switch roles is kind of it's not lucky, but it's very different. It's not the norm. I think we talked about it on our other podcast when we were with you that yeah, in most couples only one parent wants to carry or chooses to carry. And so we are lucky to have both of us who are willing. Yeah. Which is, just
It's interesting. It's
yeah,
again it's a very personal choice.
exactly. And for a lot of people, it is very just cut and dry. Like, I have no interest in carrying. That's, something that if you want to do, great for you. But it was it was good for us in our case that we were both willing from the very beginning, and it was kind of like a conversation that we had from the start and an understanding that both of us would like to have a chance to carry. So it was like we had to have the conversation. We allowed ourselves to grieve the time. I think that Jenny also had to allow herself to grieve her process, like her journey. Like, there was obviously some, I mean, like hiccups or growing pains, whatever you want to call it, that came along with this decision. We had to really get real with each other. We had to be really honest, because if we had allowed ourselves to continue to like tippy toe around the situation and just jump into, okay, we had the miscarriage, Marianne, you're trying next month. Like, to jump right into that, I think we would have really hurt ourselves in the process. And so it was good that we let ourselves grieve, we let ourselves feel whatever needed to be felt, and then we did have a little bit of time of misunderstanding where maybe the other person was. We were doing a little bit of the tippy toeing where it was like, I kind of felt like I was ready to start trying. Jenny didn't want to push me into being ready to try. And so it's like, if I'm not saying that I'm ready, Jenny's not going to push me to decide if I am ready or not. We were both just kind of like in limbo, like kind of just side by side, like, oh, yeah.
Would you say that that was like a noticeable shift in your relationship, when like a shift after you changed roles? Was that one of the shifts, you think?
For sure. I think that we really got honest. We had to have the hard conversation of, I had to ask Jenny, are you really ready to be done with this process, this part of your process? Obviously, this doesn't mean that we're done trying to make a family. Like, it's just another step in that process. But
Right.
it really had to be a decision that Jenny was fully ready to be done with that side of the partnership. And I do think we also we looked at it differently. Like Carolina says, reframed it, right?
Oh Lord. It's
No,
so weird to see like you quote back like private Reiki sessions we're having. Not
oh,
only is it like very vulnerable for you, but to hear them like giving you such personal advice, you're gonna it's
but it's true. We literally
it,
use
oh my
you
gosh,
in
I'm dying
our
right now.
conversation. Yeah, it's great. But no, we really reframed it, and we had to create it like a bubble. So our journey as a couple is our journey. But in between that, we had my journey to try to conceive. And so we had to have a conversation that this journey that Marianne is starting, yes, we've been trying to conceive for 2.5 years, but this is a whole new start for Marianne.
It was really important to segregate, like, even though you are a couple, but your physical journey and trying to conceive with IUI would be very different than Marianne's journey to IUI, and to respect both of those experiences and open up to what's going to unfold with Marianne, that not to expect it to go the same way.
Exactly.
And just honor what is to come, because maybe it's easier, maybe it's going to be less complicated, maybe it's going to be what's going to be had, and not to overcomplicate it with things that are like, well, this is the way it's go because this way I experienced it.
Right. We really had to, I like that, like segregate it, really separate our feelings about, and obviously our feelings, we were able to hold on to those things. Yeah, it doesn't erase everything that happened in the last 2.5 years. Like, we've learned a lot and we get to take that with us. But yeah, I think
Absolutely.
I had a little bit more of a difficult time feeling like, okay, like this is just a separation. Like, this is like my side of the journey. Jenny had her side of the journey, and that was something that in the very, very beginning we had multiple, yeah, lots of conversations about not separating, but we used the words like, it doesn't have to be the same. We don't have to feel the same ways, and I kind of hope that it's not the same. Like, a lot of the things now looking back that, yeah, we didn't know or that I went through, I'm like, I hope you don't go through that. But if you do, I at least have some insight to be able to know the feelings that you could possibly feel and kind of relate to you on that level and be able to help.
Anticipate.
Exactly. And
It's still respectful, but like not projecting, but these are potentially some emotions that may come up for you. And if not, great. But if they do, just understand I'm here.
Definitely. There's been a lot of conversations like that. And yeah, a lot of reflectiveness and like reflection that we've been able to have, or that I've been able to have myself personally, where I'm like, yeah, that's insane that Jenny was doing some of those things alone. And Jenny has, been, I want to say, a more supportive parent than I was to her, because it was like we didn't know at that time like exactly what was needed.
You just don't know what you don't know until you're going through it. I had a manager in corporate tell me that. Like, she goes, I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know much about kids. She was always out with a sick kid. And then she goes, one day you'll know when you're a parent. You just don't know what you don't know until you've walked it. Like, there's just so many, intricacies about the rules that you're going through, like just how it's going to feel when you're laying on the table and staring at the ceiling, or like, in some cases, interactions with doctors, you didn't know that you might be triggered in a different way than the last. So maybe Marianne, it needs to stay a little bit more quiet, and Jenny needs to speak up for you. Like, if there's like an interaction with a doctor that's unpleasant, learning to let the supportive parent be more of your protector, that you're in this vulnerable conceiving receiving part, letting the supportive parent speak up for you when it's needed, and also learning that it's okay to be protected when maybe you've always been the protector, which is, throw your business out there, like you've always been the protector, and now you're the one that's trying to conceive and go through it as the caring parent. You need to switch and let Jenny be your protector. And that's been like a huge mindset like shift for you, right? Like that's had to like lay down my arms and lay down my I have to be very vulnerable. Like that is like a huge, I would almost say, identity shift for you.
1,000%. Like that is such a good way to say it. It was an identity shift, and it's still something that I'm working on, like I'm still
I
working on
don't think it's something that comes overnight. It's something that has to be practiced. Like, as I'm an elder millennial, but I'm not I when I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of practice of using my voice at all. I didn't have a voice. So as a parent now, I unknowingly, until I got validated on another podcast, she goes, well, that's great. You're actually allowing Ollie to practice his voice and to say no in stressful situations. Like, how would you know, like, how to be vulnerable or how to be more relaxed if you've not had a lot of practice at it? So it's really important, as adults who didn't have this a lot of practice as children to do this, like you're learning this as an adult. So, it's really, that probably wasn't the best metaphor, but who did not grow up, learning that it was safe to be vulnerable. It was probably quite the opposite. So you've had a lot more life experience validating that it's not safe to be vulnerable than, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable. This person who's your spouse is going to protect you. So you've probably had more experience validating quite the opposite of what is needed while you're going through IUI.
Yeah, that has for sure been an identity shift for both of us, I think. Like it kind of just came
I would
naturally.
agree.
It
Yeah.
was like one day, me, I'm usually the more, I don't know the word, like expressive or like open to like talking about how I feel. Like I'm way more like vocal when it comes to something that I'm upset about or something that frustrated me. And so there was one time where we were sitting on the couch talking about a situation, and I was like the chill one, and Jenny was like, and I'm not gonna let that happen. And the next time that what like, and it was like, I literally, it was, are you? Where are we? Who? Like, what did you do? Who am I and who are you? Like, it was very, very weird. It wasn't like we had had a conversation necessarily at that point about the identity switch or the role switch. It wasn't really like we were talking about it in those terms, but it was like all of a sudden I'm looking at Jenny and I'm like, wow, like, so that's what I look like sometimes, you know? And
Amazing.
like, this can be good, like, we can make this happen, and we can be what the other person needs in a different way than we've ever had to do before, because I was usually the one if there was an issue with a doctor, I was the first to say something. Like, I can remember, like,
Wait a minute.
a little bit,
Wait a
like
minute. That's wild to me because you usually have like usually you're telling me you have issues with doctors, but it's usually because you're the patient.
yeah, when I'm the
So you
patient
don't have an issue confronting a doctor as long as you're not the patient.
right,
Oh,
exactly.
wild.
I'm 1,000% ready to confront anybody when it comes to something that they have done or said to Jenny. But then when I'm the
Okay.
patient, I'm like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
yeah, yeah.
it checks, right? It all checks out." But no, I can remember like I think it was maybe not Jenny's first IUI, maybe it was the second one or something. And I'm standing there, and yeah, Jenny's on the table, and the doctor's there, and our doctor's very sweet. But Jenny made a discomfort face, and I was like, "Are you in pain? Are they hurting you?" And I'm saying this out loud so that maybe the doctors, and I'm like, I think you're hurting her, like, and so I was always very ready and willing to like say anything that needed to be said, even if Jenny she was just silently making a face, and I was just like, "Are you okay? Like, what do I need to do?" Like, and so, that has been kind of like it's like a softening, like definitely like
It's a really great way of putting it.
thank
I
you.
hope for anyone that's listening that your partner is that you're going through fertility with no matter what your orientation is. I hope that you have someone that is fiercely loving and protective the way that Marian is of Jenny, and that you have someone that's going to fight for you, speak up for you at the slightest sign of discomfort or anything negative, because I know a ton of women that don't have that type of connection with their partner. And it is my greatest wish for everyone to know that type of support and love and protection. I know my husband is the same way. It's very great. So, okay, so we talked about the caring parent and the supportive parent as roles. So there are other roles that's going to take for a lesbian couple to get pregnant. So some of those might be maybe a supportive friend to you as a couple. And again, probably choosing a sperm bank as a role. And then having, of course, a reproductive endocrinologist that's going to do the insemination. Well, I don't know. Can OBGYNs do inseminations or only REs?
At least from what I understand, I don't think that normal OBGYNs can do that. I know that in
Okay.
some states where home inseminations are allowed, doulas or
Mhm.
midwives can perform at home inseminations. It
I
was
would
it would
argue doulas cannot.
IUI, it would be like an ICI, like an intracervical insemination.
Mm.
But I mean, same.
Doulas cannot do any medical care.
Oh, okay. So then midwives only.
So midwives only. Doulas, anything that's doula is solely informational and supportive care. They don't have medical training.
Gotcha.
They can't make medical decisions. They have to be certified to come into a hospital and things like that,
Mhm.
but they cannot perform medical procedures at all or make medical decisions for you. That's a big misconception. But definitely, if it's a certified nurse midwife, meaning because that means they're medically and certified, trained, and licensed, not there's another type of midwife that is like classically trained through maybe indigenous practices or Amazon type of practices, which is not medically trained, like through a medical school. So you want the medically trained ones. Those are the ones that are like here in Nebraska that are allowed to be used. Like you can't use the other ones. But so yeah, so talk more about I just wanted to put that in there just so that we're correct with all the things that we're giving out on the podcast. So you're saying there's in-home insemination. So there's additional, so we got supportive friend, we have our E, and then we have sperm bank. But now we also, if you're not going to use a sperm bank and use an RE, you can do an at-home insemination. And this wasn't around even a couple years ago. This is all very new technology and newly approved by the FDA for a lot of these things.
Right.
Correct?
truth is that there have been technically at-home inseminations for probably way more years than anybody realizes. But yeah, they were stereotyped, but I think it's truth. Like there are families who were made via like turkey baster. Like that's a thing that some people will make jokes about, like, oh, like you just used a turkey baster, but like no, literally, like before things like Mosey Baby, before things like Frida Fertility, like at-home insemination kits, before all those kinds of things, like there were people, this is years ago, like before even like reproductive endocrinologists would do anything for queer couples, there was a lot of like
Oh, I
a
didn't even think about that
secret
time.
like a secret way of doing it. And if you wanted to have babies, it was like
It was a known
Mm.
donor. You
right, you had a friend or someone that was close to you that you trusted, because yeah, in a lot of ways, especially like queer women, were not necessarily safe to go to a doctor and say, this is my wife, this is my partner, we want to have a child. That was just not a conversation that you could have. Like a lot of this was done at home in secret, very kind of like hush hush, with like I said, like a trusted known donor that you knew could be there for you, but also like wasn't gonna go and, I don't know, rat you out to your employer or something. Like there really was like a lot of taboo surrounding it and a lot of like misconceptions on stuff like that. So truth is even as many as I would guess, like maybe 40 or 50 years ago, there were donor conceived children happening, but they just weren't happening in clinics. They weren't happening in like medically regulated ways. And it was still happening. People were still creating the families that they wanted in like the
alternative ways.
Yeah, but also in like the height of like the speculation, like it, you there was sometimes like wondering like, well, how did they have a baby? But it was just taboo, so people didn't talk about it. So
So
I
talk
think
to
also
me.
back into that role might be a known donor, if that's the way that you decide to go. Like we're
It's
using an
true.
anonymous donor. Other people have known donors, and that's the way that they do it through their entire process. So that's definitely another role to consider, that there would be like a known donor person in your life that
I
you
didn't even
trust.
think about that. I'm
Yeah.
just so used to your story. That's true. Can you
Yeah.
talk to me about the role, since we talked about a lot about the RE in the last episode? Can you talk about your journey? And let's just go into it, of choosing the right is sperm bank.
Hmm.
Yeah, sperm bank and sperm donor. But for us, there are very,
Because
I
those
would
are
say,
two different roles. Sperm bank is a business that you're choosing, and like, what are their services? What are their guarantees? What are their fees? And then the sperm donor is what they're selling. And like,
yeah,
then they have their own demographic, their own profile. So like, two different things to consider and two different markers or key points to consider when choosing those two roles. You
Hmm.
want to dissect that?
Yeah.
definitely. So there are a lot of bigger sperm banks. There's a couple of them in California. There's one in Seattle. There's one in Canada.
New York.
Yeah, so those are the bigger ones. The
There
price,
are some in Europe too.
yes. And so
Those are
I
more regulated, I found out on TikTok. Like,
interesting.
United States sperm banks are so unregulated compared to Europe.
Hmm.
I'm sure.
I will say that for another day. But
Yeah.
anyway, I went down sperm baby TikTok, or
Yeah.
donor conceived baby TikTok. Have you been there yet?
I mean, we have not on TikTok necessarily, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's been a lot of conversations about surrounding donor conceived children and their rights and the things that they
Yeah.
deserve. And
There's one lady who has a whole podcast, and she's trying to map out the babies to the donors and how many babies per donor. There was a gentleman, I came across it. I think I sent it to you, Jenny. And it
Probably.
was, how, you didn't watch it?
No, I think you did send it, and you were, because you had told me about it. You're like, I'm gonna send it. So then it was like, yeah, I think it was.
It was really unnerving. But anyway, this gentleman, he went on to donate a lot, and it was like a big goal of his to donate as much as he could, and he ended up like having 500 donor conceived children. He is banned
Yeah,
from in donating ever again in his life, because it creates a population problem of like
well, yeah.
potential, if you have 500 children and potentially have siblings marrying each other.
yeah,
So, and then I learned, and I was listening to this one girl's podcast. She's a comedian. She's amazing. And she's a donor conceived baby. there's only like 7 states in the United States that have like strict or like any regulation regarding fertility. So how did you choose your sperm bank?
We really had to think about the cost per vial because it could cost anywhere between $900 to almost $3,000 per vial. So we had to think about that, which we went with obviously the cheaper version of it
because it's all of it's expensive no matter what. And so we really knew that we needed to, I mean, and I do think, and we at least hoped that even though we were choosing like the cheaper end of the spectrum, that we weren't sacrificing on like quality, because the truth is as unregulated as I know that the US is in terms of like all of that stuff, we knew that these sperm banks were at least part of their guarantees, and part of the things that we looked at, or the things that they can guarantee us, right, is that they are going to choose healthy men, that they are going to be very particular in the samples that they're given and what they choose to take and discard, and also in the fact that they were going to give us the medical and like family history information that we needed, because for us that was like the biggest thing. We weren't necessarily set on an eye color or hair color. Like we really worried about like medical history, any kind of genetic
Yeah, because
testing
most
that
people
people,
don't know.
right?
Yeah.
Like, so were you able to get that then?
Yes. And see, also with the
Wow, that's amazing.
with the bank that we also chose, obviously we're Latina, so a lot of other banks you would only have like maybe two or three options of men
who were of like Latin descent of some way. And that's not even us being particular by saying because we are Mexican. Like, no, these guys are from like Latin America, like they're Portuguese and Colombian on mom and dad's side. And so it's like you get to see both of those things. You get to see where they're getting the genetics from their mother's side, their father's side. And so it wasn't even like we were being particular in terms of like Mexican nationality. It was like, we just were looking for someone with Latin descent in general.
Yeah.
That was a big deciding factor, because a lot of these like banks that were like in the northern parts of the US, it's like you're gonna have a lot more of like people that are of like European descent, like white nationality, but also like Asian, or in some cases like African American. But we knew that responsibly, like we needed to like have a donor that was of Latin descent, because that's our culture already too. Like, responsibly, for us, at least in our opinion, it was like we weren't gonna choose an African American donor because culturally we're not able to give that child what they need, what they deserve. And so that was a big conversation that we had to have too. And that was a definitely a deciding factor in what bank we went with, because if like there was two options and then we look at their medical history and we're like about one, then we're down to one. And then so it narrowed itself down for us in that way, in
Wow.
terms of what was available.
Some of the things I have never even thought about. I had helped a client also. Her family was from the Caribbean and she was Latina. And she had the hardest time. She was looking to adopt an embryo and she could not find a Caribbean Latino donor embryo. Or she started looking at sperm, but she couldn't find in her area, or like just to get like she couldn't get access. And then she started looking at embryos and she couldn't find. She only found embryos that were of European descent or Asian descent, but she couldn't find any Latin embryos that were accessible to her. Again, it's just another thing in the fertility industry that like when people say, "Oh, you can just get an embryo."
Yeah.
No, it's not that easy. Or like you can just buy sperm.
Or a lot of people will also say like, well, you can just adopt. And
It's not the same, and they're two different things. They're two different needs. And adoption is not a solution to fertility.
No.
It's not.
But the same kinds of issues apply. Like when you're talking about like culturally someone or a child that would fit culturally with you, that you would be able to provide them the right like access to their own culture, it's like then there's a responsibility for that too. Like you can't just, I mean, I know
Right.
that, there are differing opinions on that for sure, but it's like that's also something to consider when people just say like, what if you just adopted? It's like, okay, like great, thank you for that. But it's not always, yeah, it's definitely not a solution, but it's also not that simple. And it's not even that different in terms of how much it costs. Adoption costs so much. And, that's something that I don't think a lot of people think about too. Like you're talking about fertility costs and oh, what a dread that must be. But it's like, it's also very expensive to try to pay to adopt a child. Like, saw something the other day. It was from the Uniquely Knitted podcast, and they said something
I
like,
love that podcast.
yes. They said something like fertility or infertility rather just feels unfair in all of the things
It
that you have to
is.
think about and all of the things that
It's
you have to deal
fair.
with and the backlash, yeah, the conversations you have to have, but just unfair that other people, it's like it's a privilege to not have to think about the different things that go along with infertility in all of its forms. Like, yeah, like even just something that could seem as simple as finding an embryo that shares your culture, that shares something that matters to you. It's just,
Right.
Yeah.
There's so much there. Infertility is unfair in so many ways, particularly for couples for you who can't conceive the traditional
Right.
way or quote
Yeah.
normal way,
Oh.
or like the fact that certain sperm is priced higher than others based on marketable markers or race or qualities. And this is all in the business of making a human. So why is this more expensive than this file? Why is it easier for some people than others? Why is for people who do not even want children? Why is it so easy? Oops. And then, there's just so many factors about it being unfair. Trust me, it's one of the things that keeps me up. And I'm like, one of the great life mysteries, it's not even great, one of the very unfortunate mysteries of life of like, why is this a thing that's in the world? What? So I would like to know, what are the next steps for you in your fertility journey? Like, what are you guys doing next? So now Jenny's the supportive parent, Marianne is the caring parent. What is next in your fertility journey? Because we know that you're going to have you on again. So what can we potentially be praying and hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're hoping for and we're, asking for like collective hope and good thoughts and baby dust and all the good things
And we
that
got it for you then.
when that when the time comes for my first IUI that it would be really, really smooth and that it would be successful and all that stuff. So we're in the process of working towards my first IUI. We've had some hiccups along the way, which, I'm sure is a story for another time. But we're getting there. We're taking all the steps necessary. We have actually found a new sperm bank, and we are with the same reproductive endocrinologist clinic and everything.
Yeah.
But we made some changes into this, obviously the donor, because we had to change the sperm bank. So that's a different change that we've made since all of this started. And yeah, we're just working towards hopefully first IUI being the successful IUI. And yeah, I'm hoping that the next time we talk that
You're
there's good news
pregnant.
for everybody. Yeah.
And we could talk about your morning sickness.
The lack thereof.
Or lack thereof.
I'm already manifesting all the things. I learned from you,
Oh,
like
Lord.
very much envisioning the perfect pregnancy. Perfect for me, not necessarily that it's perfect in every
A
single way, but
positive
positive
pregnancy
experience.
experience.
Yep.
Why'd you switch sperm banks?
Well,
Let's just dive into it. I mean, we're already here.
we're gonna do it. Okay.
Let's do it. Well, we've obviously been with the same bank for 2.5 years.
Right.
We, in that time,
Had lots of issues.
But this last time, we bought sperm. We did actually try to inseminate back in, I believe it was February. The
With
medication.
Marianne.
Yes, with Marianne. the medication that Marianne did try didn't create the follicles
that we needed.
that we needed. The RA said, no, let's not do it this time. So in preparation for that, on top of, taking medication, on top of testing her ovulation, we also have to think, when do we
ship the
sperm?
Which is always the fun part of
Yes.
figuring out the logistics of all of that, because
It must be so stressful.
Yeah, because it's like, it's not just
The
like,
timing has to be just right?
It's so not conducive to making a baby, because it's like you're just adding stress upon stress. It just feels like the most ridiculous, like, stacking game of like, okay, but make sure it's exactly at the right time
and this day.
Yeah.
And so since that was unsuccessful, like we weren't going to do the IUI, we sent the sample back to the clinic, which we have done, to the sperm bank, which we have done plenty of times, no problem. So we tried again in March. The medication that Marianne was on was fine.
Yeah,
it worked.
My follicle looked good. The doctor was happy about it. We were, well, before this happened, we in preparation of this follicle check with the doctor and the good news, in preparation for that, we called the sperm bank and said, hey, we're looking at a possible insemination in like 2-3 days, so can you send it to us? And they were like, what was your name? And you can hear the clicky clacky on the keyboard. And then they're like, hold on. And they put us on hold, and we just kind of thought like nothing of it. And then they come back on the phone and they say, we don't have anything for you. There's no sample here. And we were like, is this a joke? I couldn't even process what they were saying. And so they were like, no. And then I said, no, we actually, we had a sample. We bought it, quite a few months back. But then we sent it back to you last month when we had a canceled IUI. We didn't go through with the IUI.
And I keep all the tracking info. Mm-hmm. Like, I literally have like a stack of it. So I was like, real quick on UPS, I was like, no, it got there on this date.
Which is still within the time frame of the sample being viable.
Because also, another little known fact, when you ship it, you have 7 days to use it before it gets, I guess, for like unusable.
Ruined,
It gets, I don't know the term.
Expired, I think is what they use.
Yes, yeah. And you can no longer use it.
So they tried to say like, no, you didn't tell us that you were sending it back. And we were like, yeah.
But then what did you do with the sample then?
They said
someone can't just receive sperm and it goes missing, because that has to be something. There has to be inventory. There has to be reconciliation.
They said they threw it in the trash.
Shut the fuck up.
So we were like, you threw away.
They threw away your sperm in the trash?
Away, essentially, $1,000, because we'll be vulnerable as we are, in the trash.
Yep.
And was there any compensation?
There was a lot of crying on my end. I
bet.
And we are days away from an insemination that in our heads, it was like, this insemination was going to work. We had a good follicle.
Right. No, I remember.
It does not work. And so I'm like, we're a few days away from an insemination, and you're telling us that there's nothing, and they were very, she didn't seem, the girl on the phone, she didn't, and I understand, like, she's just like a representative or whatever, but she did not have a whole lot of empathy or a whole lot of like understanding of our situation. I'm explaining this all to them, and I'm telling them like our whole story. I'm like, we have been with you guys for 2.5 years. We have tried so many different times. Like this, you can't. You're kidding me. And eventually, I had to ask to talk to somebody else, and their solution, or their proposed solution, was that they would offer us 10% off our next order. And that's exactly what our faces look like too.
And then on top of that, our donor.
I know you told me this story before, but I'm like hearing it for the first time. Like it's just like hearing it.
Yeah.
So there was no like, I sent you back our sample or our sperm. You accepted it. You signed for it, and then they threw it away. And then you called again, and there was no like accountability for their failure.
Zero. They actually.
So what did you do? Please tell me you made a TikTok and you tagged them and made the internet go viral.
Literally everybody telling us to leave a Yelp.
Why didn't you? You were telling me you didn't do that? Why? I would have done it for you.
This is us right now telling the world our story.
Yeah.
And
we literally,
I'm going to do it today.
you should.
Can you text me the information of the sperm bank later?
we had to just like, then we had to grieve the fact that we were going to go to this follicle check and potentially get great news and then still not be able to inseminate. And I went back and forth with like, what's going to be worse? Is it going to be worse if we show up and they say, yeah, you know what, this dosage of medication didn't work, we're going to have to try new meds? And then would I feel relieved, or would I feel still sad that the meds didn't work? Or was it going to be worse if I show up and they say, oh my God, great, your follicle looks good, let's do this in 2 days, and then we have to say, actually, we can't do it in 2 days because we don't have sperm? It ended up, obviously that the follicle did look good, which in hindsight, that was better news because at least we knew that the medication did what it was supposed to do.
Right.
So we had some semblance of good news from this whole situation. But yeah, it was a really, really stressful few days. Then we had to, deal with like, okay, this could have happened, but it's not happening. And this is why it's not happening. There were even emails back and forth still after that, like trying to rectify the situation a little bit better. And there was still very little compassion and very little understanding. And yeah, they just kept coming back with that their best offer was that they could give us 10% off of our next order. And yeah, I think Jenny was going to say, like, we had to then also, if we had decided to stay with the same bank, we would have had to choose a new donor because the donor sperm that they threw away, that donor was no longer available. He didn't have anything available. So then that was another decision that they made for us. Yeah, it was a doozy of a time.
So that's our journey as to why we picked the new sperm bank.
And how do you feel about the new sperm bank? So what's different about the new sperm bank?
We did end up reaching out to them before we even decided to purchase. We told them the story that happened with the previous bank. They were super compassionate about it. They were like, we can make this better. We want to be here to support you. And I was like, look at that.
Night and day.
Like instantly over email.
Transactional versus compassionate and heart service based. Yeah. Oh my God, the lack of accountability. Like, if I make a mistake in my business, I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. What do you need to feel whole again? And then this is what I'm going to do. Or sometimes it's just complete refund. At least refund that money.
At least.
Like, because they can't get, if there's no more sperm from that donor, then like at least refund something. It's not going to replace like the hurt and the pain that you've gone through, of not being able to proceed with that insemination. But like $1,000, it's not chump change.
Literally in the trash. And I feel like obviously we've had IUIs that weren't successful, and I'm like, okay, but that's different. That's money towards an actual try. This is money that is literally in the garbage. I just can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, that was rough. And but I mean, if we're really being like, if we're trying to spin it, which we had to reframe it, we had to kind of look at it like, okay, well, this taught us that sperm bank doesn't care about us as people.
There's no humanity in that situation in their response. Like, there's no caring, there's no compassion, no empathy, no accountability. There's nothing other than, all right, F you, and here's 10%.
Their excuse.
That's how I interpret it.
Right. Their excuse was really abysmal. It was like, yeah, you might have been able to do that in the past without telling us or without alerting us, but we're busier now. We're servicing more people now than before. And I'm like, it was literally never said to us ever that that's what we had to do or that was the procedure. It was always just, it has to make it back to us in the time allotted, which is exactly what we did. And yeah, their excuse was, well, we have more clients. I'm like, but do you have more clients that have been with you for 2.5 years?
But these clinics have to have what's called standard operating procedures. Exactly. So when like any of these clinics, because there is some type of auditing that's done. And when you receive packages, I used to work in pharma. So there are strict procedures, standard operating procedures when you're dealing with any type of human thing. Right. I used to make vaccines for animals, and I also worked in human health. I used to make medicine. So like when you receive a delivery, There is even a standard operating procedure, which is a written down set of steps and sequence that you have to follow in order to have success and have a desirable outcome. That's how all medicines are made. That's how all clinics are typically run, especially manufacturing facilities or anything that is a retaining a human substance, because that would fall under FDA because of the semen. So they failed. And just as a person that was an auditor, their SOP failed.
Yeah.
So, and when I had people that were like not working, then that would open what's called a deviation, and you would do an investigation of as to why that was done. So I'm gonna, when we hang up, when we end this podcast, I'm gonna go through and I'm going to research the exact federal regulation governing what set of regulations are governing sperm banks.
Yeah.
I need to know just from so I can sleep later, because that actually is a bigger deal than you actually might think about it. Because if, for example, when I worked in pharma, we would receive things and sometimes we would have to send it back. We wouldn't be allowed to receive certain things at the site because of maybe we didn't have the license, it was a controlled substance, or it was not marked properly, and they would send it back. And then if you did receive something, you had to like catalog it in a certain way. It had to be, was it frozen? It has to have labels. And then it has to go into a certain area to receive that properly, or it's not even opened until it's in the proper area in which it is designated. So if your sperm was frozen, there had to be labeling on the box, and it had to probably have been shipped in a timely manner. So just letting you know, just a back end. And again, have never worked in sperm, but I am like, if this is regulated at all in any type of like FDA way, there are standard operating procedures that are required by federal regulation that they have to have in place. And when they get audited by the FDA, they looked, when FDA goes and descends upon like a facility like that, they audit every procedure.
Right.
They do walkthroughs to see, like, I am so hell-bent on looking up this. This is what I did for 17 years in corporate, is I was I'm coming unhinged. Okay, so how can people find you on the internet? Because you have a blog. How can they read that blog?
We do. You can find our blog probably easiest through our Instagram. We're at _Ortegas on Instagram.
DTHEE.
Yep. And so that's where we will post about blogs. That's where you can find the link directly to our blog. And we're also on TikTok as the Ortegas as well.
Fucking obsessed with you. Ladies, thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for being brave. And thank you for sharing your story. I can't tell you what a privilege it is to know you, serve you, and share space with you.
We appreciate you for having us back, but also, like, it's funny, like, yeah, we do these podcasts every once in a while, but it's like we're talking to Carolina at least once a week, like through the Make a Baby like
membership,
or through the next level of fertility. Like we're constantly talking to each other, and yeah, the feeling is completely mutual. Yes. We are as obsessed with you, if not more. We are so thankful for everything for us. Every way that you've helped us heal to get us to this point, like we are so thankful for you. Thanks for
I'm
having
so thankful for you.
Yes. And if you're not part of the membership, again, you need to do it for yourself. Yeah. Because the amount of
So if you're trying to conceive, we have a monthly subscription membership called the Make a Baby membership. And that is where you can participate in monthly life calls. You can have community, you can chat with me, and there's set recorded meditations and Reiki healings that for any part of your fertility all the way through postpartum. And we have live circles every month for fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum. So we're here to serve you the whole way through. And even before, if you're preconception and you're like, I'm going to try to conceive later, come and join us. It is a steal at $49 a month. And for the next time, grab a friend, tell them how Reiki can help them conceive. And until next time, let the Reiki flow, friends. Feeling hopeless in your fertility journey, fearful that you'll never become pregnant? The Make a Baby membership was created just for you, using the exact methods of Reiki that helped me conceive my son. We've helped over 75 babies come into this world by removing blockages from the womb and body with our powerful Reiki techniques. Visit CarolinaSotomayor.com to join the Make a Baby membership today.